This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever podcasting app or website you are listening to this on. To do that, you can just go to our homepage and hit the subscribe button. If you're on Apple Podcasts, it'll be in the top right-hand corner with next to that plus sign that says subscribe. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever you may be listening to this episode on, and you can always know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast here at the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, please subscribe to the podcast so you can get those alerts and notifications, and that way you can never miss an episode and be one of the first people to listen to a new episode when we release it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review on that same podcasting app or website on that same device. Just to give us a boost of confidence, to let us know that you guys are enjoying the content and discussion points and the structure of the show. And if you are, again, we would really appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Podbean, whatever you might be listening to this on. Again, same thing, just go to the homepage and click leave a review. That would give us a big boost of confidence. Again, it would let us know that you guys are enjoying the structure of the show and everything about it. So that would be awesome if you could. And finally, if you could follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Over there, we can interact and pretty much talk about anything. Over on social media, we can talk about sports, we can talk about life, we're going to do some live tweeting of some big-time hockey games or baseball games when the season starts. Whatever it may be, all of those interaction needs can be found on social media. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would love if you could do so. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy and healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We have a fantastic show for you all today. Coming up later on in the episode, I want to get to some sad news. LeBron James has a high right ankle sprain and will be sidelined indefinitely. What does it mean for the Lakers going forward? Again, no timetable for he or Anthony Davis's return as of yet. Both are out indefinitely. How can the Lakers stay afloat, and how far will they drop in the Western Conference? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode, as well as the Miami Heat are expected to be maybe the most active team at the trade deadline. They're looking at names such as Kyle Lowry, Victor Oladipo, and LaMarcus Aldridge. I'll break down that situation and those three players and some mock trades that the Miami Heat could be doing specifically with the Toronto Raptors that I think would be really intriguing and maybe get them over the hump in the Eastern Conference. Also, coming up later on in the show, I do want to give you my third installment of the mock draft. I've done 2 pre-free agency, of course, now that some teams have addressed some needs in free agency, like the Giants and the Dolphins. I will be doing a new mock draft, just the top 10 picks. That is also coming up later on in the show. If we have time, I also want to get to Carson Wentz and the Indianapolis Colts as his press conference. And really the first time Carson has spoke since the whole situation went down in Philadelphia. He had a nice interview with Pat McAfee that I watched, as well as his press conference with the Indianapolis Colts. We'll break down that whole situation later on in the show. And of course, we're also going to get to the Miami Dolphins, who did eventually use their money. I talked about it last episode. What were they doing with the money? Who were they saving the money for? Well, it was indeed Will Fuller. They signed that speedy receiver, got to a speed weapon, and one of the more surprising moves of free agency. I'll also break that down later on in the episode. But I want to start off everything with the biggest free agent signing maybe so far in this NFL free agency period, and that was Kenny Golladay, the best wide receiver on the market, widely considered to be maybe even the best free agent on the market since Shaq Barrett was re-signed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kenny Golladay has reached a 4-year, $72 million agreement with the New York Football Giants. Now, right off the bat, everyone is going to point to this contract and look at what the other wide receivers got, such as Juju Smith-Schuster going back to the Pittsburgh Steelers, Corey Davis going to the New York Jets, and of course Will Fuller signing with the Miami Dolphins. And the one thing you're going to see with those 4 guys, including Kenny Golladay, is one of them decided to go multiple years and got the most money out of anybody, and that was Kenny Golladay. He seemed to be the main guy that people were willing to commit to long term. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know if I love this deal for the New York Giants. I mean, again, here's the thing with the New York Giants. That you have to understand that in the NFL, there's destinations. And in anything, and in life, there's destinations. When you want to pursue a new career, when you want to maybe start a family somewhere else, you look at different cities, you understand where you want to live. This is the same thing with NFL players. Guys want to go to certain markets. They want to be close to family. They want to maybe go to a big city. Maybe they want to go to a place with better nightlife, or maybe they want to go to a place that, again, maybe they have family there, or in-laws that live near there for their kids or something like that. And Kenny Golladay, it had been reported that he wanted to be in New York. He wanted to be a New York Giant. Again, there were some reports that other teams like Chicago were pursuing him. I heard the Bengals gave him a 1-year, $18 million deal, which I thought was one of the more interesting reports that came out of free agency. Kenny Golladay was born and raised in Chicago. So again, when I saw Chicago making a deal for him, potentially I thought that could be a place. But again, Kenny Golladay and the Giants were really a partnership that had been rumored before free agency. It was up there with, like Corey Linsley to the Chargers was rumored before free agency started and such. Things like that. It was one of those rumors that people actually got right and insiders actually got right when speculating and reporting over the past couple of weeks. Again, doesn't mean that Kenny Golladay wasn't considering other offers. He was. Again, I'd say teams like the Bears and a team like the Bengals also gave him a 1-year essentially max offer for him at that point. Again, Kenny Golladay is an interesting player because, again, he's got all the talent in the world. He was drafted in the 3rd round. This is what people need to keep in mind as a developmental piece. This guy was not a high-round selection. He was not some top 10 draft pick that was supposed to be good right out of the gate. His rookie year, he came into the league at 24, only played in 11 games, only had 28 catches for 477 yards. And then 2018 is really when he had his breakout season. So his second year in the league was when he really decided to come together along nicely. Had 70 catches that year, 163 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then that's when things really started to pick up. 2019 made even another jump. Finally played and started all 16 games. Again, the year before that in 2018, he played in 15, only started 13. In his rookie year, he played in 11, only started 5. But in 2019, finally played and started in all 16 games. Had 65 catches that year, 1,190 yards, 11 touchdowns. Definitely was his breakout season, and that's when people were speculating, did the Lions extend this guy? Do they franchise tag this guy? Heading to last season, age 27, Kenny Golladay played and started in just 5 games this year, dealt with a lot of injuries. In those 5 games, had 2 touchdowns, 338 yards, essentially a wash year for him. When he was playing, he looked like that same player that we saw in 2019 and 2018, 1,000 yards, 65 to 70 catches, close to double-digit touchdowns, and Kenny Golladay was exactly that player. Now, my issue with Kenny Golladay is a couple of reasons. One, he was playing with Matt Stafford. So this isn't your classic wide receiver who was maybe trapped with playing with a bad quarterback. Now, he might have been playing for a bad team in Detroit, but he wasn't necessarily playing for a bad quarterback. For example, a lot of times when teams make these big-time moves for a star wide receiver, usually that receiver is going, or when a receiver signs in free agency, most times guys sign to a place where they're going to get an upgraded quarterback because they know that their entire game, their contract, their livelihood revolves around who's playing quarterback, who's throwing them the ball, how they throw them the ball, how they're going to get their stats up, how they're going to get all these things going in terms of their contract and incentives and things like that. And again, when you sign a contract in the National Football League, there's a high chance that a lot of it is based off incentives. You want to hit your stat markers, especially for receivers. You want to hit your reception total, your yardage total, your touchdown total. And again, Kenny Golladay has a contract that's built with incentives as well, as a lot of receivers have this year. Because again, with this receiving class, you have to remember, it took this market a little bit to develop here in the wide receiver free agent class. Because of how good the drafts have been the last 2 years, how guys, teams are finding guys in the 2nd, 3rd round, 4th round that are producing in the slot, that are producing over the top. And again, it's easier to find a receiver than maybe any other position in the league, which means guys are going to get these long-term contracts that they want, especially with the COVID year as well. When things take it down, the salary cap wise, guys are not going to get these big long-term contracts. Again, we saw Will Fuller sign a 1-year deal. Juju Smith-Schuster went back on a 1-year deal. Multiple receivers are signing 1-year deals all around the NFL, except for Kenny Golladay. He got the 4-year, $72 million deal. And again, he is downgrading at quarterback with this situation, which is why I'm nervous about the deal. We saw Stephon Diggs go from Kirk Cousins in Minnesota to an improved Josh Allen. So Josh Allen now, not Josh Allen 2 years ago or something like that, but Josh Allen now. Clearly an upgrade over a guy in Kirk Cousins. We saw Odell Beckham Jr., even though he hasn't necessarily panned out fully in Cleveland, the idea is he is an upgrade. Baker Mayfield's an upgrade over Eli Manning, who he was playing with, and a little bit of Daniel Jones, right? So that's the thing you want to keep in mind, that guys are built off of their quarterback. So Kenny Golladay must have a lot of faith in the Giants organization when they tell him, the Giants telling Kenny Golladay, that Daniel Jones is going to be the guy that's going to make sure you hit your incentives on this contract, that gets you the ball, that wins us games, that gets us in the playoffs. And it's going to be I want to know how they sold Kenny Golladay on this, because last year Daniel Jones in 2020 played 14 games, had a 5-9 record, 62% completion percentage, under 3,000 yards, 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. Average, folks. Average is the word that I would use. His rookie year, we saw, played 13 games, started 12. Pretty much the same thing. 62% completion percentage. He had 24 touchdowns to 12 picks, a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. So actually, he threw had a worse touchdown to interception ratio probably this year in comparison to his rookie year, which is interesting. I don't know if he necessarily got better. Yes, the Giants came out of the second half of last year. Again, I've talked about the Giants a lot. They reminded me a lot of the last year's Miami Dolphins when they were tanking. I like the coach Joe Judge. Comes from a New England, no-nonsense, disciplined system. He's going to keep your team in check. And he's clearly got a defensive, sort of gritty edge to him. That defense was legit last year for the New York Giants. Whenever I want to think about the New York Giants, you want to talk about their season and recap, go back, watch those highlights about that game against Seattle when Colt McCoy was in the game and not Daniel Jones. That looked like a team that was rallying hard for their coach, doing anything they can to win the game, laying it all there out on the line. And again, that is a nice mentality you like to have. The Miami Dolphins had that mentality again, and they made a huge jump in year 2. But will the quarterback situation be there? Because now Daniel Jones, again, the Giants, this was not the only move they made in the offseason. They re-signed Leonard Williams. They also brought in speedy receiver John Ross from the Cincinnati Bengals, who didn't really pan out there. But again, in a league that is priding itself right now on speed receivers, John Ross, change of scenery, who knows, maybe it could work. Not to mention Saquon Barkley will be coming back next year healthy. They still have Evan Ingram, who I think is an overrated tight end, but he is a nice offensive piece. And that defense is good. So what does this tell me about the New York Giants, about this deal, about everything? It's all about Daniel Jones. And that is what it's always been about for the New York Giants. Again, good defense, standard ownership, probably one of the better ownership groups in the league, standard front office. Dave Gettleman's a little bit shaky as a GM, but there is consistency there. There is a plan there. There's experience there. There's been past success throughout the New York Giants organization. They're a well-run team, well-run organization. I think Joe Judge is a really, really good coach for that city, for that franchise. Again, that New England no-nonsense style has a defensive, gritty edge to him. And again, guys want to play for a guy like Joe Judge, things like that. That defense was already a top 10 defense in the league last year, at least the second half of the year. Had some huge, huge games. They were struggling with some offensive weapons, but now they get Saquon back. Like I mentioned, they bring in Kenny Golladay, not to mention they add John Ross. Who knows? They might take a receiver at 11 as well. So who is it on? Now it's on to Daniel Jones, who, in my opinion, needs to make a Josh Allen-esque leap in year 3, just like Josh Allen did. Does he need to be as good as Josh Allen? Does he need to be an MVP candidate? Does he even necessarily need to win whatever Buffalo won, 12, 13, 14 games? No, he doesn't need to do that. But I can tell you for damn sure Daniel Jones needs to come into the league better next season than having 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and a 62% completion percentage. Again, it's not terrible completion percentage, but that 10 touchdowns or 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions is not great. He obviously has a fumbling issue. Had a QBR last year of 61.5. He's a below average accurate passer. I think he throws a nice deep ball though, and that's what I'll give him credit for. Daniel Jones does throw a nice deep ball, better than some of these other rookies that we've seen struggle like Tua Tagovailoa and Joe Burrow. I really do believe that Daniel Jones throws a pretty nice deep ball. Kenny Golladay is a vertical threat. So in my opinion, the Giants did add a receiver that will benefit to Daniel Jones' strength. Again, I don't hate the move by the New York Giants. They needed a number 1 receiver. They're not the destination they necessarily maybe used to be, considering Daniel Jones is still unproven. So you're going to have to overpay a little bit. And again, if Golladay can stay healthy and produce for 16 straight games like he did in 2019, maybe even a little bit better. Again, I don't think the Giants are paying for 2019 version of Kenny Golladay, which was, again, 65 catches, 1,190 yards, 11 touchdowns. I think they're paying for an even better version of that, and that's what I would be doing if I were the New York Giants. I don't think you want a baseline. I think what you really want from Kenny Golladay in particular is to get more catches. That's the one thing that he can improve on. He hasn't really necessarily come close to 100 catches, but a dominating receiver in this league and a real, true number one receiver who you can go to anytime, anywhere. Guys like Julio Jones, what Stephon Diggs is now, what teams are going to hope Jamar Chase is going to be if you're the Miami Dolphins or if you're maybe the Detroit Lions or another team that might draft the receiver high. 100 catches, 10 touchdowns, 1,000 yards. That is the baseline around the league for an elite wide receiver, a true number one wide receiver, a guy you give max money for. Kenny Galladay's got the yards and the touchdowns. I'd like to see him get more receptions. Now, when you talk about Matt Stafford and the Detroit Lions, there's a lot of people on that team. Marvin Jones was on that team. There's been other receivers throughout the years in Kenny Galladay's time there. And again, he was drafted in the third round as a developmental piece. He wasn't necessarily supposed to be the player that he eventually developed into. But here, now in New York, he's the true number one receiver. Everybody knows he's the best player necessarily on the offense, besides Saquon Barkley, obviously. No other guy's going to get as many looks, as many targets, and nobody should, frankly, as Kenny Golladay. So when you see the targets, again, he got only 119 targets in 2018, only 116 targets in 2020. That's not a whole lot of targets for a guy that you eventually want to develop maybe into getting 1,000 yards and 100 catches one day. So again, his yards per catch is one of the better ones in the league, and it's fantastic, actually, really. All around. Doesn't do a whole lot after the catch, but has that speed. Again, is more of a jump ball, physical freak receiver. I think it's a good move for the New York Giants, but Daniel Jones, it's all about him next year. Can he develop? Can he take that next step that Josh Allen made in year 3, that Kyler Murray made last year and might make again next year, that Lamar Jackson made? Doesn't have to be an MVP type level. I don't want to put that bar too high for all these young quarterbacks heading into year 3, because again, year 3 is always the make or break year for a young quarterback. You sort of get a pass your rookie year. Second year, you're supposed to show improvement, and third year, you're supposed to be the player that everybody thought you were supposed to be. And if you can do that, does Daniel Jones, again, doesn't have to be Josh Allen MVP type level, doesn't have to necessarily be Lamar Jackson where you're winning every single game or 80% of your starts or whatever the stat is, but win your division. With this talent, with this defense, with this coach, and this not great division, to be honest with you. I like Washington a lot. They're my pick to win the division right now, but we know Fitzmagic can turn to Fitztragic at any moment. Philadelphia is a dumpster fire, and the Dallas Cowboys don't have a defense. So if you're Daniel Jones, the expectation, at least in my opinion, if you're a Giants fan, is win this division, we'll find a quarterback who will in the draft or via free agency like we've seen teams be doing. They have the weapons. Saquon Barkley, now Kenny Golladay on a 4-year, $72 million deal. Great defense, great head coach in Joe Judge. Easy division in the NFC least. It's all on Daniel Jones. It's up to him how far the Giants will go. In my opinion, they will go, the Giants that is, as far as Daniel Jones will take them. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I do want to break down the Miami Dolphins signing of Will Fuller, because it was, in my opinion, the most surprising move over the last couple of days. It wasn't really rumored that they would go after Will Fuller specifically. I think we all knew they would add a receiver, but not necessarily Will Fuller. I'll break down why I love that move for the Miami Dolphins and some other football stuff coming up right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my spiel on sort of a state of the union of the New York Giants. Again, there's another rumor coming out, actually, as I'm recording this, that Adoree Jackson, the former cornerback from Tennessee, first-round pick, really nice cornerback, could be heading there too. So again, another bolstering of the defense there in the secondary for the Giants potentially after adding Kenny Golladay, John Ross, re-signing Leonard Williams. Again, I think the Giants will go as far as Daniel Jones takes them. And again, I like all these pieces of the Giants. I really like their weapons now that they've added Golladay and Ross. Saquon's coming back. The offensive line is improving. That defense is already legit. I think Joe Judge is a good head coach. And I think Jason Garrett honestly did a great job as an OC. They really need to get that quarterback situation figured out. But if Daniel Jones does not turn out to be the player they want to be, the Giants could be up there with destinations for free agent quarterbacks and guys on the move as soon as next season, or they could look in the draft as well. But hopefully for Giants fans, Daniel Jones turns out to be one of those guys like Allen or somebody else that makes a huge, huge leap year 3. And if he does, the Giants could easily win that division. I think they're the most talented roster in that division, besides maybe the Cowboys, but I think the Cowboys are a little top-heavy. Right now my pick's Washington because of the moves they made in the offseason, but it's going to be a fun race to watch, as it always is, in the NFC East. I want to transition now to the other major wide receiver signing that happened. That was Will Fuller, the wide receiver out of the Houston Texans, who is one of the more interesting pieces of free agency. Sort of flew underneath the radar. People sort of forgot that he was a free agent because he didn't play the last 5 games of last season because he was suspended for performance-enhancing drugs that he will have to serve one more game of at the start of the next season. He signs with the Miami Dolphins on a 1-year, $10 million deal that is essentially a big fat giant signing bonus of $9 million, so it's not too much against the cap. And we knew that the Miami Dolphins were going to add a receiver, right? They have a lot of holes on their team, but however, you know that the story of the Dolphins, they tanked 2 years ago, according to people, tanked. Brian Flores somehow wins essentially 5 of his last 9 games after having the worst start in NFL history, turns the culture around, turns really the franchise around. They get Tua Tagovailoa. They have the half Tua, half Fitzpatrick, or 90% Tua, 10% Fitzpatrick in that one game against the Raiders, you could say. And now they're in the season. They in a normal year, they would have made the playoffs. They win 10 games. They miss it. Some of the holes they needed a new center. They added Matt Skura. They needed to improve their running back game. They added Malcolm Brown, and will probably look to the draft as well. And they needed wide receivers. So there were a bunch of different names that I thought they would go after, one of them being Juju Smith-Schuster, Curtis Samuel. They opt for Will Fuller on a really nice contract. Now, Will Fuller, you could argue, and I would say, is definitely the second best receiver in this class. I think the only guy he would be behind is Kenny Golladay, but Will Fuller on his best day might look better than Kenny Golladay just because of how the league works. The league now, more than ever, is based off speed receivers than jump ball receivers. So when Kenny Golladay and Will Fuller are really both at their best, and if you want to see Will Fuller at his best, look at that game versus Detroit where he had over 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. He looks unstoppable, and Will Fuller right there looks like a true number 1 wide receiver. I don't think he is. I don't think the Miami Dolphins signed Will Fuller with the intention of him being a true number 1 receiver. But if you quietly look at the Miami Dolphins, how they're positioning themselves with weapons around Tua Tagovailoa, if they nail this draft and maybe add one more piece in free agency, this sort of goes along with my mock draft, I think Tua Tagovailoa could make an absolutely monster leap next season. We know what Tua Tagovailoa does best: get the ball into playmakers' hands. What's the biggest problem with the Miami Dolphins? They have absolutely 0 playmakers. At Alabama, Tua Tagovailoa had Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle with Najee Harris in the backfield. All guys who not only are incredibly unique and talented, but also thrive with the ball in their hands and run after the catch. Even Najee Harris, when he gets the ball in space, run after the catch ability. Dolphins were dead last in run after the catch last season, not even close. They were also dead last in percentage separation of yardage for each of their receivers. And that's not saying they don't have good receivers. I think Mike Gesicki is a stud tight end and will be flourishing for years and years to come in Miami. And I like Devontae Parker a lot. In fact, I find Devontae Parker as a just slightly worse, sort of like a poor man's version of Kenny Golladay. Jump ball guy, can make a lot of plays for you, and he has about 3 to 4 games a year where he looks absolutely unstoppable, that he wins every jump ball, that he gets 2 touchdowns. That happens about 4 games a year for Devontae Parker, but he battles some injuries. So now you have the jump ball guy in Devontae Parker, you have a pure speed guy in Will Fuller, two guys who are really going to be able to work off well with each other, have completely different games, aren't going to take any, each other's touches, and if anything, it's going to help spread out the defense and open up gaps for each other. I think Will Fuller bringing a safety with him for the deep ball is going to help Devontae Parker in the intermediate jump ball game. It's going to help Mike Gesicki in the slot when they play him there, or when he's on a one-on-one coverage against linebacker, because again, the safety is too busy dealing with Will Fuller or with Devontae Parker. But if the Miami Dolphins, who are also rumored to be in on the T.Y. Hilton sweepstakes, could add T.Y. Hilton, another speed receiver, then they wouldn't have to draft a speed receiver with the third overall pick in the draft. Now, a lot of people are speculating, what could Miami do? Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, maybe even trade down and take Jalen Waddle. But if they do add T.Y. Hilton, and they've already added one speed receiver in Will Fuller, I'm not sure if Miami's going to go the route of Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, or Jalen Waddle. Keep an eye on Kyle Pitts, because here is what I'm thinking about for the Miami Dolphins. And spoiler alert, I have them taking Kyle Pitts in my mock draft. I think Kyle Pitts is the second best player in this draft class, only behind Trevor Lawrence. But if you take out the factor of him being a quarterback, I think the best player in this class is Kyle Pitts, if that makes sense. Obviously, Lawrence is number one because quarterback is the most demanding position in sports. But if all positions were considered equal, I think that Kyle Pitts is better as a tight end / receiver than Trevor Lawrence is as quarterback. I think he's a generational talent. I've compared him to Calvin Johnson. That is the only guy that has come into the league that has a similar size, speed, build prototype. And again, don't put him in the box of a tight end. Put him in the box of just a dominant offensive specialist weapon. Play him on the line, play him in the slot, play him on the boundary. Do whatever you want, Miami, if you take him at 3. But all you need to do is put the ball in his hands, and Tua Tagovailoa will be able to do that. But if they don't add another maybe speed receiver like a T.Y. Hilton, I think they'll probably go with a guy like Jamar Chase at 3. But this is assuming that they add another piece. I like T.Y. Hilton in Miami. He went to FIU, born and raised in South Florida, another speed guy for that young team. And again, the Dolphins are the only team in the NFL to not have a player over the age of 29 on their active roster right now. T.Y. Hilton should change that. I think you need at least one veteran, especially if you're going to draft a young guy. So let's say Miami does this. They have Will Fuller now, who, again, I'll get to the signing in a minute, has had a productive career, has never played all 16 games, which is concerning if you're a Dolphin fan, but last year looked like the best year of his career. In 11 games, he had 879 yards and 8 touchdowns, so on pace for 1,200 yards and about 12 touchdowns. Had 16.6 yards of reception, which is absolutely incredible. His catch percentages was 70, which is incredible. Averaged about 80 yards a game on about 5 catches as well. So an efficient, really, really nice player. For yards after the catch, he had 291 of those last year. Yards after the catch per reception, Will Fuller was 5.5. That's pretty big as well. When you're talking about guys like Tua Tagovailoa, who like to anticipate, who like to hit you in stride. Will Fuller matching up with Tua Tagovailoa is a match made in heaven for him. We didn't see Tua throw the deep ball a lot last year because, again, Tua's really used to throwing to speed guys who have created separation because, again, Tua thrives at ball placement and anticipation and hitting dudes in stride so you can turn a 5-yard out into a 70-yard touchdown. But when you have guys like Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, stiff jump ball guys, all Tua can really do is throw it up and hope for a prayer. And Fitzpatrick was better than Tua. But now that they've added a speed guy and Will Fuller, let's say they add T.Y. Hilton as well. You still have Preston Williams there as a 4th guy. Devontae Parker as a 3rd. Mike Gesicki as tight end 1. Go for the overkill. Get Kyle Pitts. Have this sort of unicorn tight end wide receiver playing wherever you want. Jump ball, slot route, out route, off the line fade in the end zone. Whatever you want, Kyle Pitts can do. And telling you right now that if the Miami Dolphins play this right, take Kyle Pitts at 3, Najee Harris, the running back out of Alabama, at 18. What if Tua Tagovailoa at his full dispensary went from last year, literally, I'll read this exact depth chart, who he was throwing to against the Kansas City Chiefs and New England Patriots. For 2 of these games, he was throwing to Lynn Bowden, Adam Shaheen, and Mac Hollins. Those were his top 3 receivers for those 2 games. If he went from that to Mike Gesicki, who would come back from the injury, Devontae Parker, now add speed receiver Will Fuller, add speed receiver T.Y. Hilton potentially, who they're in the mix of, Najee Harris coming out of the backfield, as well as Malcolm Brown, who they signed from the Rams, who was an absolute bruiser of a back, and then add Kyle Pitts. That's 4 to 5 weapons that you could argue are one of the better ones in the league, and then there would be no excuses for Tua Tagovailoa and this Miami Dolphins team. Incredible rock star head coach Brian Flores, maybe the best defense in the league and the best secondary in the league with that Dolphins team that created the most turnovers in the league last year. Add that on top of those 5 weapons that I just mentioned for Tua Tagovailoa, there really wouldn't be any excuses. And I don't think there would need to be any excuses made because I think Tua Tagovailoa would absolutely skyrocket after this. Again, the value deal for Will Fuller is fantastic. 1 year, $10 million for a guy who was on pace for 12 touchdowns and 1,200 yards. Complete speed demon, 70% catch percentage, one of the league leaders in separation. Again, Miami went the dead last wide receiving group in the league at creating separation. Their guys simply did not create space between them and the cornerbacks. It was jump ball city for the Miami Dolphins. It was tight windows city for Tua Tagovailoa. Instead, now he gets to throw with a guy who is one of the league leaders in separation in Will Fuller. And again, on a 1 year, $10 million deal, that also allows Miami to franchise tag him at the end of next season. I think it's a win all around. And for Will Fuller, you get to come down to South Beach, no state income tax, beautiful weather, $10 million a year, help Tua Tagovailoa grow. And you already know that when a receiver, a young quarterback, builds a bond with a receiver, we saw it with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. We've seen it with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. They don't let that wide receiver go anywhere. So if Will Fuller and Tua Tagovailoa do mesh and create a bond that is strong within the organization and that is leading, the team to wins, maybe Will Fuller's the best receiver in the Dolphins next year, gets the most touchdowns, most yards, most looks. Will Fuller will not have to worry about a long-term deal with the Miami Dolphins. If Tua Tagovailoa wants him there long-term, the Miami Dolphins will keep him long-term. That's how it will work when young quarterbacks sort of get and match with star receivers. I'm not saying Will Fuller's a star receiver, but he has the potential to be in this new offensive system with the Miami Dolphins. I honestly think that Will Fuller could be not to the same level that Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs were. No way. Not even the same level. They were the best quarterback and wide receiver duo in the league last year. I'm not saying that. But Will Fuller could be Tua Tagovailoa, Stephon Diggs, sort of as a security blanket, a guy who always creates separation, always gets open, and don't be surprised if Will Fuller's used in more ways than one than just the straight-up streak routes and flag and post routes and deep ball threat. Maybe they'll use him in the intermediate game. Hell, they might even run him in the slot. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I do want to get to my top 10 mock draft again. Break down the top 10 picks, what's changed, what hasn't, why I have players where I have them going, and if we have time, I will touch on the Carson Wentz situation, but we might have to save that for next time. Maybe those two things coming up right after this short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masper. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my whole spiel on the Will Fuller signing for the Miami Dolphins. Again, maybe one of the more surprising moves of free agency this year. I think 1 year at $10 million is a great value for him. Of course, it's also incentive-based. Actually, no, for Will Fuller, it's not incentive-based. For Kenny Golladay, it's a little bit incentive-based. But for Will Fuller, it's just a straight-up signing bonus of like $9 million and $100K, or $1 million base salary, something like that. Again, if you can get two of the right weapons with speed, I think he'll do better with some speed receivers who can create separation than those jump ball guys. Dolphins add one of the best separation receivers in the league in Will Fuller. I want to transition now to my mock draft. I've done two of these, just the top 10 so far. Of course, draft week is coming up in about a little under a month. I think like 40 days, or a little over a month, I should say. That week, of course, I will do a full first-round mock draft, so I won't just keep giving you guys the top 10. I know the first two I did were just the top 10. This one will also be just the top 10. I do have two expected trades that I've been thinking a lot about as well, so that will be fun to tell you guys. But let's get right into it. This is my updated NFL mock draft really after the free agency period has sort of started. Again, a lot of free agents still out there, guys like T.Y. Hilton, Jadeveon Clowney. I know there's a lot more, but just off the first major wave of free agency, this is the top 10 mock draft that I came up with. Obviously, with the first overall pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars didn't go out and trade for Deshaun Watson or anything like that, so they still need a quarterback. That being said, that means they will be selecting Trevor Lawrence first overall. Again, I know the rumors about Zach Wilson. I know I've talked about this at length. And I think Zach Wilson is a great, great player, prospect, I should say. I think he struggles a little bit with pressure in his face. But again, if you want to make the argument that Zach Wilson did, arguably more with less than Trevor Lawrence, you can make that argument. I don't necessarily agree with you, but you could make that argument. And you could also make the argument that Zach Wilson is a better playmaker. But at the end of the day, the best quarterback in this year's draft class is Trevor Lawrence. Again, I think he's a bigger, faster, not necessarily stronger, but I think he's a better version of Justin Herbert. I'd like him to beef up a little bit. I think Trevor Lawrence plays a little bit skinny, but if he can gain some weight, not too much, like 15 to 17, 20 pounds, that'd be great, and then he would be a lot more built for the NFL. Not that he already isn't. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to win Rookie of the Year next year. Wouldn't surprise me if it's not close. I think Urban Meyer is a good coach for Trevor Lawrence. Again, knows the college system, knows the college game. Didn't love what the Jacksonville Jaguars did in free agency. Would have loved to get them some more weapons for Lawrence, but this is year one of their rebuild. For teams like the Dolphins, the Jets, and some of the other teams that were really active in free agency, it's year 2, 3, maybe even year 4 of your rebuild if you're like Buffalo, who are now in contention and things like that. It's been a process for some teams, and Jacksonville's just at step 1. But I think the first part of their plan is to draft Trevor Lawrence with that first overall pick, and I think it is the right move for them. With the second overall pick, I do believe the New York Jets will, in fact, trade Sam Darnold. I don't know to what team, though. A lot of the teams that were interested in Sam Darnold have found their quarterback. I looked at a team like Washington and the Colts as two interesting fits. Washington obviously adds Ryan Fitzpatrick, so they're not in the QB market, I do not believe. And, of course, the Colts have Carson Wentz now, so they're not in the market either. Who could go after him? I could see San Francisco. That would be a really interesting fit for me. San Francisco would save some money moving Jimmy G to a team like, I don't know, the Patriots or something like that. And then if you added a guy like Sam Darnold, he'd be cheaper. Not sure if they'll do that. Maybe Carolina goes that route too, but it wouldn't surprise me if they draft a guy. But I do think the Jets will eventually move off of Sam Darnold. They'll find a trade partner for him, and they will go all in on Zach Wilson, who's getting some Kyler Murray and Patrick Mahomes comparisons. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I do think he's definitely an intriguing prospect. Maybe the most intriguing prospect in this draft because of his unique playmaking ability. And he does have that really, really high ceiling where if everything pans together, just like it did for Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, special things could happen for the New York Jets organization. So I have them taking Zach Wilson, quarterback BYU, at 2. I know I already spoiled the third overall pick, but I do have the Miami Dolphins taking Kyle Pitts. I think them drafting Will Fuller is a low-key signal that they might not be taking a speed receiver at the top, that they might not be prioritizing that. Again, I don't want to call Pitts a non-receiver. He's a wide receiver tight end hybrid. I think he's going to be a better version of Darren Waller, if that's even possible. Darren Waller looks like maybe the best tight end in the league right now, and I think Pitts might be really, really good day one. He'd be my number 2 pick to win Rookie of the Year behind Trevor Lawrence, because usually it goes to a quarterback. So with the third overall pick, I do have the Miami Dolphins selecting Kyle Pitts, the tight end wide receiver hybrid out of the University of Florida, an absolute machine physically in every which way. Kyle Pitts is an absolute mismatch, and I think he would be great for Tua Tagovailoa and this Miami Dolphins offense. Coming in with the fourth overall pick, I think the Falcons are going to go quarterback. I understand Matt Ryan sort of restructured his contract, which made it interesting. Really bumped it for 2 years. So it looks like Matt Ryan's going to be a quarterback in Atlanta for 2 years because of that contract restructure. Again, maybe he's gone after this year. But I do think they're going to go quarterback, and the quarterback that I think they're going to take, instead of Justin Fields like I've had them in the latest mocks, I really do believe that Trey Lance will be selected by the Atlanta Falcons. Recently, Trey Lance had his pro day at North Dakota State where he showed off all those bells and whistles and traits that he has. He is one of the more physically gifted quarterbacks in this class, sitting about 6'4", 6'5", runs really, really well. However, he didn't really run that much during his pro day. He wanted to show off his arm strength ability, dropped a lot of nice deep balls, struggled a little bit in the red zone with the fades and the timing and the accuracy. But again, he's sort of like the Josh Allen of this class, guy who's got all the traits, all the potential in the world, coming from a smaller school in North Dakota State, but just needs to put it all together, go to the right team, go to the right fit. I think Arthur Smith would be a great guy to have Trey Lance be around. Again, they have Matt Ryan after restructuring his deal. Looks like he might even be there for 2 years now, so if you want to sit and wait and let Lance sort of develop for 2 years, you could even do that. if you wanted Matt Ryan to sort of ride it out the end of his days in Atlanta for 2 years instead of just one. Or you can maybe move off of Matt Ryan next year, making the backup, whatever you want to do, and obviously run with Trey Lance going forward. But I think Trey Lance is going to go a lot higher than people think. I think we know where the NFL is going in terms of direction. Everybody wants the next Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, these guys who are uber talented. So I think Trey Lance will actually shoot up draft boards, and I think he will go as high as 4 to the Atlanta Falcons. Coming in number 5, here's the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, here's an interesting pick. Everybody and their brother has them going with Penei Sewell, the tackle, or Rashawn Slater, another tackle. Here's what the Bengals told us in free agency. In free agency, they did not move off of any of their offensive linemen, so they had Jonah Williams still at left tackle. Then they signed, I think Riley Sheriff is his name, from the Vikings, who was their starting tackle. So now they have 2 starter caliber tackles, and they threw a huge 1-year contract at Kenny Golladay. What does that tell you if you're a football fan? They are pleased with the current offensive line, at least at tackles, with Jonah Williams and the guy they signed from the Vikings. So I don't know if they're going to go with a tackle high up in the draft. Maybe they'll take him in the second round or something like that instead. And they're not satisfied with their receiving room because they obviously offered Kenny Golladay a huge money. Apparently it was 1 year, $18 million. Jamar Chase would still be on the board in this mock draft, obviously, as Lawrence went first, Wilson second, Pitts third, Lance fourth. And I don't think the Bengals would pass up on an opportunity, especially just for marketable reasons, to have Jamar Chase be a Cincinnati Bengal, reunite him with Joe Burrow. That was obviously maybe one of the greatest, if not the greatest, quarterback wide receiver duos in college football history. So I believe the Bengals in this version of a mock draft would take Jamar Chase at 5. At 6, I have the Eagles also going wide receiver. I think they would take Devonta Smith. They need a new face of the franchise, right? Carson Wentz is gone. That sort of Philadelphia Super Bowl era is gone. Obviously, Nick Sirianni's a new head coach. They need somebody who's going to be able to put butts in the seats and sell jerseys. I think Devonta Smith would remind a lot of people of Deshaun Jackson-esque, similar body build. Not the same player, obviously. Deshaun Jackson was a pure deep speed threat. I think Devonta Smith can do a little bit more than Deshaun Jackson could, but similar body type. Obviously built off speed, of course, tall, lengthy. I would really like to see Devonta Smith in Philadelphia, and I think he'd be great for Jalen Hurts. And, of course, they were on a team together for a year. Not sure how much reps they got together. Devonta Smith was a true freshman, and it was obviously Jalen Hurts' second to last year. And then, obviously, when he was the backup to Tua Tagovailoa, he was also sharing. So they've been teammates before. That's an underlining story to keep an eye on. Don't be surprised if the Eagles go with Devonta Smith, who has a connection to Jalen Hurts. That becomes the Lions at 7. Now, this is where I think at the farthest Penei Sewell will fall. Dan Campbell is an old-school football guy. He's going to want to run the ball, build through the trenches, and that's how year one of a rebuild starts. They already have their quarterback in Jared Goff. They don't have great receivers, so it wouldn't surprise me if they went receiver here as well, considering they lost Golladay and Marvin Jones. Both of them are gone, so keep an eye on Waddle here as a potential guy. But I do think they're going to go Penei Sewell here since he is there. I don't think he would fall past 7. Tackle, Oregon, obviously. Generational tackle. Some people are calling him the next Joe Thomas. I don't think he would fall out of the top 5, arguably. But in this mock draft, I have him going 7th to the Lions, and I think they start the rebuild with their cornerstone left tackle. Of course, the new GM, Brad Holmes, comes from the Rams with Jared Goff, who obviously had Andrew Whitworth for years and years there. So they know the value of a good left tackle for Jared Goff. Goff needs a good offensive line. I think Penei Sewell would be the good sort of new building block for that rebuilding O-line. All right, so number 8 is the first trade I have, and it's the Texans trading Deshaun Watson to the Carolina Panthers, which I believe will inevitably happen, meaning the Texans are on the clock at 8, and I believe they take their quarterback of the future in Justin Fields. Justin Fields reminds me a lot of Dak Prescott. I think he's got all the tools in the world, struggles a little bit with reading defenses, but that's what rookies are going to learn eventually. But at the end of the day, Justin Fields, I think, is the prospect that's been over-scrutinized. Last year it was Justin Herbert. The year before that it was Lamar Jackson 1 year. I think this year it is definitely Justin Fields. I think he's got all the talent in the world. We need to go back and remember that game against Clemson he had. It was one of the better games of the college football season that year. He was absolutely electric, absolutely incredible. And I think the Texans remember that game, and once they move off Deshaun Watson, they want to run a similar system, and Justin Fields can do that. They already have a quarterback in Tyrod Taylor, who they signed to sort of be a veteran mentor, and I think 2 mobile guys. I think Tyrod would be great for Justin Fields, and that's where I have him going. The next trade I have is actually with the very next pick. I do believe the Broncos are going to trade down in this draft. They don't have any like really immediate needs that they could solve in the top 9. I think they trade down to 15 with the Patriots, and the Patriots are really building a roster for a cheap quarterback. Now, of course, they have Cam Newton on the cheap, but it wouldn't surprise me if they brought in some draft competition. I think they go with Mac Jones at 9. Cerebral would remind me of them a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo, who thrived in that Patriots system. And I think he's a less talented version of Jimmy G, but he does some things better than Jimmy G. I think he's got better ball placement and better short-term accuracy. But with that deep ball, I wouldn't surprise me if Jimmy Garoppolo was a better deep ball thrower. But I think the Patriots go up to number 9 and snag Mac Jones. And at number 10, I have the Dallas Cowboys, who need a corner. I would have the Cowboys trading down because I think that's what they should do, but I don't think it's very Jerry Jones-esque for them to trade down, meaning I think they will stay at number 10 and pick the first defensive player of this mock draft, and that's Patrick Surtain, the corner out of Alabama. Superstar corner, potentially number 1 corner, and the Cowboys need any help they can get on defense, so I think they go in the secondary. That's going to do it for this segment. To recap quickly, I have the Jags taking Lawrence at 1, the Jets taking Wilson at 2, the Dolphins taking Pitts at 3, the Falcons selecting Jay Lance at 4, the Bengals selecting Jamar Chase at 5, the Eagles selecting Devontae Smith at 6, the Lions take Penei Sewell at 7, the Texans trade Watson to the Panthers, move up to 8, select Justin Fields, the Patriots trade up to 9, with the Broncos select Mac Jones, and then at 10, I have the Cowboys taking Patrick Surtain. So that's the quick recap of that mock draft. That's going to do it for this segment. We're going to take one more final short break, and on the other side of this final short break, I want to get to a couple of NBA storylines that we have to get to, including LeBron James's unfortunate injury to his right ankle. How far could the Lakers fall? Will the Heat be trading for Kyle Lowry or Victor Oladipo? And what's going to happen with LaMelo Ball in the Rookie of the Year race now that he has broken his wrist and he will be done for the year? We'll get into all that good stuff right after this final short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network for the final segment of today's packed show. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my mock draft post-free agency, just those top 10 picks. I'll give you another one probably next week or so after some more free agency signings have been done. And of course, before the NFL draft, I definitely will do a full 32 round 1 mock draft, probably the week of the draft. That's the late April, I believe, and that's going to be a whole lot of fun. So that's coming up in about 40 days. For the final segment of today's show, I want to talk about LeBron James's injury. Maybe the most durable athlete of my lifetime has suffered probably the second. It's not really a major injury. Again, it won't sideline him the whole year. Just injury, period. He had that hamstring his first year with the Lakers. Now a bad right ankle sprain. It's going to keep him out indefinitely. Anthony Davis is already out indefinitely. At the time of this recording, the Lakers are currently 3rd in the West, sitting at 28-14. They are 6 games ahead of the Dallas Mavericks, who are 8th, about 6.5 from Golden State, who are 9th in the West. I do not think that the Lakers are going to fall out of it. Again, there's no timetable right now, so I can't give you exactly my thoughts on how much the Lakers will drop. I'll tell you one thing. They are going to drop. They're going to go through a rough patch. Again, with no AD and no LeBron, this team doesn't look like a playoff team to me. It looks like Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, which would fit around the Grizzlies profile, maybe the Pelicans, and that's being nice. So I'm expecting a losing streak for the Lakers coming up. It's unclear how long LeBron's going to be out for, but the sooner AD can come back, the better to at least relieve some of that. And they're 28-14 now. It wouldn't surprise me if they dropped a couple straight, dropped down to like 7th, 8th seed in the West. Again, you know LeBron's going to try to rush back from the injury because he doesn't want this team to fall out of playoff contention. But again, the West is pretty close. Only 6 games separate the 3rd seed from the 8th seed. Again, if he's out indefinitely, that probably means at least 2 to 4 weeks. At least 2 to 4 weeks, if I had to guess. Could be more worse, like 3 to 6 or 4 to 8 Who knows? We'll find out soon enough. But LeBron James with a high right ankle sprain suffered against the Atlanta Hawks. And again, they're third in the West right now at 28-14. Wouldn't surprise me if they dropped a couple straight, dropped to between that 6 and 8 range. And then we'll see when LeBron and AD come back if they can sort of salvage the season for the Lakers. I'll tell you one thing, though, that if they're both healthy and the Lakers are a 7th seed, I would not want to see them if I were, the Clippers, Jazz, or Phoenix sitting at the top of the Western Conference. The other basketball news I want to talk about is the Miami Heat, who are apparently very interested, according to Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, in bringing in a guy like Kyle Lowry from the Toronto Raptors. Now, could they flip him and maybe add a guy like Norman Powell, who it's apparently Toronto might be a little bit suspect of paying for a long term for a Duncan Robinson, Kelly Olynyk deal? Maybe. Would Toronto be interested? That would be something to take a look at. Again, at the time of this recording right now, Toronto is obviously not in the playoff spot. They're 17-25 right now. They're sitting at the 11th spot in the Western Conference. The Heat are 5th in the Eastern Conference at 22-21. But again, not a lot separates the Heat from the 1 seed or anything really. They're only about 6 games away from the 3 seed, only a half game away from a top 4 seed, but they're also only about 2 games away from being out of the playoffs entirely. That's how close the Eastern Conference is. They want to make a move to upgrade. Their shooters, again, the Heat were the 4th best three-point shooting team in the league last year. Their whole offense was really based around shooting and pick and roll dribble handoffs and stuff like that. The Heat are now the 4th worst shooting team in the NBA this season. Something's got to change. They're interested in the LaMarcus Aldridge buyout market. I've heard Victor Oladipo been throwing around. Again, the Miami Heat and Victor Oladipo appear to have been flirting for almost 2 years now. If I had to guess, Kyle Lowry would be an interesting name to keep an eye on. Jimmy Butler and him are essentially best friends. And he would make this team really, really good. And again, if the Heat could add Kyle Lowry, Norman Powell, and LaMarcus Aldridge, I would tell you that team's the best team in the Eastern Conference, and it would be sure as a lot fun to watch for the Miami Heat. That's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Appreciate it if you did all 3 of those things. Again, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I have been your host, Alex Masferrer, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.